The Arrogant History of White Ben by Clemence, Dane, Chapter 5, Impressions of Raymond Peddle. He felt again the sag of misery, felt it more fiercely, yet with more comprehension. He was aware that by entering the house he had acquired kinship with its vanished inmates, and that his person was now permeated with the odors of the house, as once by the fragrance of the field. He smelt of humanity, and from now on the creatures of the field would fear him. Moreover, he missed his kind. The sounds that would have been companionship only yesterday now troubled him. He did not like the ruthless tick of the golden clock on the mantelpiece, nor the hand's movement across the face of its perpendicular sky. Then he observed the globe of light burning over his head and marveled at it. At last, restless with the power of movement and uneasy with loneliness, he wandered again into the kitchen, pursued by the tick of the clock and watched by the light. In the kitchen there was only moonshine, and when he turned off the noisy tap, he felt more at ease. He moved about, staring, touching, and handling. There was a pot of preserves on the dresser, and he had his clumsy finger into it. Then he put it in his mouth, and his eyes began to shine. Taste, he knew, the taste of wind, the taste of rain, the flavor of smoke, black, gray, and white. But this was a new taste, and it ravished him, as the sight of the morning glories had ravished him. Yet he did not dip his finger again. He was half afraid of that sharp new delight. Then he saw, standing on the flags by the door, the gardener's boots. Without hesitation, for his prompting memories were hurrying their education of him, and he did by instinct much that would have been an adventure 2 hours ago. He sat down, drawing the boots to him. With some labor he pulled them on over iron foot and wooden stump, but he twisted up the laces easily enough, for he knew every convolution of the morning glories, and how their tendrils twined, hooked, and held. And the boots, the old boots of George the gardener, gave his feet a shape and a sturdy tread that led to the pear-wood chair where George always sat for his elevensies. The scarecrow creaked into it, leant against the wheel-back, rested, and was happy enough. Staring out through the window from his new kingdom into his old, he would have sat placidly till morning came, had not all his senses been startled by a sound of delicate hammering, louder certainly than the whack of a snail-shell against a stone, clearer than the collision of apple twigs, but not so loud nor so hearty as old George's operations on the trellis work against the cottage wall. Following this careful tapping came a scrape of wood, a stir of paper, then silence, then a voice. "Goodbye, the soldier said," began the voice. "Don't cry, the soldier said," it continued. Ben got himself quickly to his feet, treading now with a softness which delighted his own ears and increased his general sense of mastery. He creaked back into the sitting-room, and being on alert, observed this time a second door hidden under a heavy rep curtain. His hand, of its own volition, lifted the switch, and instantly the room was hushed in grey moonshine, while under the draught protector, at the base of the second door, there showed plainly a long ruler of yellow light. The voice continued to sing. The anger which was part of Ben's nature was waking fast. Who dared to be in his confines without his leave? With the famous flapping gesture which he was never to lose, he advanced. The slight lock gave instantly, and the door swung open, dragging the curtain after it. He found himself looking down a shallow flight of steps into a room which, compared with the formal little parlor and pinched kitchen, had a free and spacious air. It had black beams, comfortable living-room furniture, and set between the two long runs of patterned curtains, a writing desk. The doors were wide, the top drawer was missing, and the lower ones had fallen forward, cascading onto the floor. All this Ben took without much interest, for a new sort of rubbish heap. Then his slow head moved, and he found himself looking into the light eyes of a young man who sat lolling back in a chair, his feet on the table, a drawer of papers in his lap, in one hand a glass, in the other a letter. As he read, he whistled. Ben saw further that he wore the uniform that the gardener's son used to wear when he drove a monster about the roads, and had not yet disappeared into the little girl's song, the very song which this new creature had so recently been caroling. that free use of her tune, his tune, no one else's tune, brought Ben's temper to boiling point. "Trespassers," said Ben angrily, in a new loud voice. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." And he flapped his arms at the astounded young man. The young man let down his feet in a hurry and began stammeringly to explain himself. "I'm the chauffeur, Sir Peddle. Lord Bothering left me in charge." He stopped, intimidated. He said afterwards, and made his fortune by saying, "It was the eyes that got me. Cold." He rephrased his impression, of course, in the articles, and finally in the biography, which he published in those lucrative days later, when the tide was high but had not yet turned. He developed indeed a very acute sense of journalism out of the need to describe variously, but always convincingly, his own life's big moment. But the substance did not vary, and the first sentences dealt always with Ben's look and size. Peddle himself was well made but short, with broad shoulders and a small waist. He had a glossy dark head, regular features, forget-me-not eyes, and a baby's loose mouth. To be dapper was his first law. It was natural that he should first of all report upon Ben's shambling length. "It was because he was standing at the top of the steps, I suppose, that he looked the tallest man I ever seen. I thought he was a ghost at first, in that white mackintosh, and then I thought he must be a giant from a fair. But I didn't want to laugh at him, no. He scared me the way he scares everyone. He had on the grey top hat, yes, I know everyone wears them now. But then no one did. Even at Ascot, they'd been out of fashion for years. His hair stuck out from under like a straw wig. I hadn't smartened him up then, you see. Oh, he looked a perfect cure. But mark you, still I didn't want to laugh. He pointed his great long arm at me, with the fingers, you know. You've seen 'em, stuck out like bananas, and he roars, 'Trespassers!' in that thick smash 'em and damn 'em voice of his. Christ, it was like lions at Whipsnade. Then he takes a step down, ever so awkward. I ought to have laughed, of course, to see him standing there flapping. I knew that all along. Something inside me said so. You laugh at him, and you'll be all right, it said. But I couldn't. It was the ugliest face I'd seen in a month of Sundays. With that dead look to his skin, and his wedge of a nose. But the eyes got me. Cold. Slaty. Black, and the white's not there. But you've all seen him, you know. He could stare at you with those chunky eyes till you couldn't stand it. And when he let go at last, you saw everything different, and ever after and colder, as if you were wearing smoked glasses. So I looked at him, and he looked at me, and in a minute or two I didn't think him so ugly. In a minute or two I was saying to myself, I'll do what you say, sir, and like it. Oh yes, he had me eating out of his hand from the start. I didn't know then what it was all going to mean, or that I was never going to have a life of my own again. But I did know that he was different from any human creature I'd ever seen, and that I wanted to laugh at him. And at the same time, you know, that it would have only been an awful nervous kind of giggling, like you get at a funeral, because I was afraid of him, all down my back. Here the ingenious Peddle would wait for the question, which, in one form or another, according to the temperament of the listener, never failed. Well, what happened? What did he do? What did you do? I'd have been terrified. I wouldn't. I'd have stood up to him. That was the opening for which he always waited. Easy to say, but from first to last, did anyone ever stand up to him? Show me anyone who did. I used to wonder sometimes why he frightened him so, for he was mild enough when you got behind his facade, got into his mind, with him, see what I mean, think his way, and he was easy, almost simple, at least so I found him. Well, I said, you must think of me taken by surprise, and a bit guilty, because I hadn't ought to be because I had not to touch the desk, and nervy because of its being night and the raid and all. Well, when he said, trespassers, like that, all I said was, if you say so, sir, I am, but I'm not meaning to be. He liked that. He dropped his arm stiffly, like after a speech, and came on down another step, carefully, the way a little kid does, down the 3 steps into the room, and when he got to the table he stood looking down at me. Can you see us? The other half, out of my chair, sort of crouch, not having had time given me to straighten into the upright, and him towering on one slant. Remember how he always leant in one, as if he had no bend to his waist? Well, he stares at me, and chumps his lips, and at last he says, you are not a crow, then? He had him in his mind even then. If I'd been a fool, I'd have laughed. Instead, I just said, no, sir, just like that, and he nods, thinking it over and believing me, and then he smiles at me slowly, as if smiling come difficult. No, there's no picture of him smiling that I know of, but when he did, take it from me, you saw summer. Then he pulled in a chair, sat down all in one, and said very slowly, as if he'd never used words before, sit down. So I sat down. Then he said, tell me everything I have to know. So what could I do? What would you have done? I sat down and I answered every bloody question. The audience at this point received the impression of a taciturn Raymond Peddle giving reluctant answers to inquiries that should not have been made, but in fact the amiable Raymond loved to talk, and was besides of an obliging habit, so, with his first fear allayed, and his hero sprawling at the table, absorbing his words and thoughts, Raymond Peddle let himself go. All he knew was at his listener's disposal. As the clock ticked away the minutes faintly through the kitchen door, White Ben of the open fields was taken to the Brixton by-street, introduced to the out-of-work father and the clerk mother who kept things going, to the squalling younger children, and the drunken lodger was fed up with it all at 15, and walked out smiling into the wide world with young Raymond Peddle, call me Ray, steering a dubious course amid the beckonings of all the sexes of a job as a chauffeur, a job which turned mysteriously into a situation as the unpaid helper of an interior decorator. Ben, acquiring strange words with a stranger accent with every tick of the clock, heard next of the great row and the breakaway and the sudden tumbled marriage which followed, of the flight from this second and feminine partner, and the brave new start as plain chauffeur and no nonsense, of a better job but with drawbacks again, of adventures in time of war, and valeting out, and finally, of the present job as one of the under-chauffeurs in one of the bothering establishments. When I came in, what were you pouring down your throat? Broke in Ben abruptly at this point, and Ray Peddle felt, as many other talkers were to feel, the pang which Ben invariably inflicted. He had not been listening then? Who knew? At any rate, his interrupting remark was always irrelevant, as if the talker's voice, like the regular thrash of river water over stones, or the tapping of a distant typewriter, had been but an endured background to the run of Ben's own thoughts. I beg your pardon, sir. Ray Peddle's voice lost its cozy note. Oh, that's the end of a bottle of lager, sir. It's a bit flat, sir. You wouldn't care for it. I'll get you a whiskey and soda, sir, shall I? His lordship left me in charge, so I didn't like to go out for a meal. Old bus, said Ben, reminiscently, for his top hat had been on intimate terms with Peddle's employer. Peddle, believing he followed the line of thought, permitted himself a decorous chuckle as he put the decanter on the table, found glasses, and prepared a drink.